Welcome to Tech with Kaushik. This is part 7 of our complete practice question series for the AZ-900 Microsoft Azure Fundamentals exam. Choose your answer before the timer ends. Then review the correct answer, detailed explanation, and exam tip. Let us begin part 7. Next up is question number 235. We are working with Azure pricing calculator here. Here's the scenario. A company is preparing a budget for a planned Azure deployment. Select the appropriate tool to complete the sentence. The first one reads, to estimate the expected cost of a planned Azure solution before deployment, you should use the blank. Pick from 1. Azure Pricing Calculator, Azure Cost Management, Azure Service Health, or Microsoft Purview. For statement 1, choose Azure Pricing Calculator. The calculator converts anticipated service configurations and usage into an estimated Azure cost. The main takeaway is pricing calculator estimates planned costs. Cost management analyzes actual and forecast spending. Let's continue with question number 236. Let's start with the scenario. A database administrator is evaluating different hosting models for a new application. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. The first statement says, deploying Microsoft SQL Server manually on an Azure virtual machine is an example of Platform as a Service, PaaS. The second statement says, Azure SQL Database is an example of Platform as a Service, PaaS. The third statement says, Azure Cosmos DB is an example of Software as a Service, SaaS. Statement 1 should be marked no. Because you manage the VM and the OS, this is IaaS. Statement 2 should be marked yes. The provider manages the database engine and infrastructure. Statement 3 should be marked no. It is a PaaS database offering for developers, not a finished SaaS application. Here's a useful exam tip. Microsoft 365 and Salesforce are SaaS. Azure App Service and Azure SQL Database are PaaS. Azure Virtual Machines are IaaS. Here comes question number 237. Here's what is happening. A startup is distinguishing between different types of technology expenses. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Now check statement 1. Purchasing a physical server and installing it in a local data center is an example of a capital expenditure, CapEx. Now check statement 2. Paying a monthly utility bill for data center electricity is an example of an operational expenditure, OPEX. Now check statement 3. Azure pay-as-you-go compute pricing is an example of a capital expenditure, CapEx. For statement 1, choose yes. Buying physical hardware requires upfront capital. For statement 2, choose yes. Ongoing consumption fees are operational expenses. For statement 3, choose no. Cloud compute consumption is an operational expenditure, OPEX. Exam tip. The public cloud replaces heavy, unpredictable CapEx with flexible, usage-based OPEX. Let's focus on question number 238. We are moving on to defense in depth. Let's focus on the following scenario. A security architect wants to protect a cloud workload by applying controls at the physical, identity, perimeter, network, compute, application, and data layers. Which security concept does this approach represent? Watch the differences between these options. Option A, defense in depth. Option B, Azure role-based access control. Option C, shared responsibility. Option D, consumption-based pricing. Go with option A, defense in depth. Let's look at the reasoning. Defense in depth uses multiple coordinated security layers so that the failure of one control does not leave the workload unprotected. The other choices do not work because B, Azure RBAC controls who can perform actions at Azure scopes. It is one security control rather than the layered model. C, shared responsibility defines which security tasks belong to the provider and customer. D, consumption-based pricing is a billing model, not a security model. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Defense in depth applies overlapping controls across several security layers. Here's an important one, question number 239. The key situation is this. A company is reviewing the benefits of cloud services. Select the appropriate term to complete the sentence. Now look at statement 1. The cloud benefit that describes a system's ability to continue operating after component failures is the blank. Choose between 1. Reliability, scalability, elasticity, or agility. Statement 1 should be completed with reliability. Reliability is the ability of a system to recover from failures and continue functioning. Scalability changes capacity. Reliability helps a service continue functioning when failures occur. Question number 240. Consider this situation. An administrator wants to manage Azure resources by using command line or shell-based tools. Which 3 Azure tools meet this requirement? Each correct answer presents a complete tool. Select exactly 3 answers. Review the options. Choice A, Azure CLI. Choice B, Azure PowerShell. Choice C, Azure Cloud Shell. Choice D, Azure Advisor. Choice E, Azure Service Health. The required selections are option A, Azure CLI, option B, Azure PowerShell, and option C, Azure Cloud Shell. This works because Azure CLI and Azure PowerShell are command line management tools. Azure Cloud Shell is a browser-accessible shell that provides both Bash with Azure CLI and PowerShell environments. The remaining options can be eliminated because D, Azure Advisor provides recommendations rather than a command line management environment. E, Azure Service Health reports service incidents, planned maintenance, and advisories. A helpful shortcut is this. Cloud Shell provides browser-based access to Azure CLI and Azure PowerShell without requiring local installation. Let's work through question number 241. First, let's review the situation. A company policy strictly mandates that all new Azure deployments must exclusively utilize Platform as a Service (PaaS) solutions to reduce administrative overhead. Which combination of services complies with this mandate to host a web application and its relational data? Here are the possible answers. Choice A, Azure App Service and Azure SQL Database. Choice B, Azure App Service and Azure Virtual Machines running SQL Server. Choice C, Azure Virtual Machines and Azure Storage Accounts. Choice D, Azure Container Instances and Azure Virtual Machines. In this case, choose option A, Azure App Service and Azure SQL Database. Here's why. Azure App Service and Azure SQL Database are managed PaaS offerings. Microsoft manages the underlying infrastructure and operating systems, while the customer manages the application, configuration, and data. B. The SQL Server virtual machine is IaaS, so the combination is not exclusively PaaS. C. Azure virtual machines are IaaS. D. The virtual machine introduces IaaS even though Azure Container Instances is a managed container service. The main takeaway is a solution containing an Azure virtual machine includes IaaS because the customer manages the guest operating system. Let's take a look at question number 242. The focus now shifts to high availability. Here's the situation to consider. A workload must place virtual machines in physically separate data center locations so that the loss of one data center does not remove every instance. Which two Azure placement choices can provide this separation? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Select two answers that satisfy the requirement. Let's compare the available options. Option A is deploy the virtual machines across multiple availability zones. Option B is deploy the virtual machines across multiple Azure regions. Option C is deploy all virtual machines into a single resource group. Option D is deploy all virtual machines into a single availability set. Option E is deploy the virtual machines across multiple subscriptions within one data center. The correct answers are Option A, deploy the virtual machines across multiple availability zones, and Option B, deploy the virtual machines across multiple Azure regions. The main reason is availability zones are physically separate locations within a region and different Azure regions are geographically separate. Either placement can separate instances beyond one data center. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. C. A resource group is a logical container and provides no physical separation. D. An availability set distributes virtual machines across fault and update domains but does not provide availability zone or cross-region separation. E. Subscriptions are governance and billing boundaries, not physical data center boundaries. Here's a useful exam tip. Availability zones isolate data center failures. Multiple regions can isolate regional failures. Question number 243 brings in a useful concept. This situation sets up the main requirement. An organization is reviewing identity concepts in Azure. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Microsoft Entra ID is a cloud-based identity and access management service. Statement 2. Single sign-on allows a user to authenticate once and access multiple authorized applications. Statement 3. Azure resource groups are used to organize user and group objects in Microsoft Entra ID. The first statement is yes. Microsoft Entra ID provides cloud identity, authentication, and access management. The second statement is yes. SSO reduces repeated sign-ins by using one authentication session across authorized applications. The third statement is no. Resource groups organize Azure resources, not Microsoft Entra directory objects. Exam tip. Microsoft Entra ID organizes identity objects. Azure resource groups organize Azure resources. Now let's examine question number 244. Next, let's move into Azure policy. Take a moment to review this scenario. An enterprise architecture team is designing a governance strategy using Azure policy. Select the appropriate phrase to complete the sentence. Statement 1. In Azure governance, an Azure policy initiative is defined as a blank. Your choices are 1. Collection of multiple policy definitions grouped together, hierarchy of management groups, set of role-based access control, RBAC, assignments, or package of Azure Resource Manager, ARM, templates? The answer for statement 1 is collection of multiple policy definitions grouped together. Initiatives simplify assignments by grouping related policies into a single package. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Assigning an initiative to a management group is much more efficient than assigning dozens of individual policies one by one. Let's continue with question number 245. Let's start with the scenario. A company is optimizing its Azure compute costs. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Now check statement 1. Azure reservations can significantly lower virtual machine compute costs compared to standard pay-as-you-go pricing. Now check statement 2. Two identical Azure virtual machines deployed in different Azure regions will always incur the exact same monthly compute cost. Now check statement 3. When an Azure virtual machine is placed in a stopped, deallocated state, you stop paying for the compute but continue paying for its attached managed disks. The answer here is yes. Reservations can reduce the effective cost of matching long-running virtual machine usage through a 1 or 3-year commitment. The answer here is no. Azure VM prices can differ by region. The answer here is yes. Deallocation stops compute charges, but attached managed disks and some other resources continue to incur charges. Stopping a VM inside its operating system may still incur compute charges. Deallocation releases the compute allocation. Take a careful look at question number 246. Pay close attention to what the scenario really requires. A company wants to monitor its monthly Azure spending and avoid unexpected invoice increases. Select the appropriate tool to complete the sentence. For the first statement, you can configure the blank to automatically notify administrators when monthly spending for an Azure subscription exceeds $5,000. For this one, the options are 1. Azure Cost Management Budget Alerts, Azure Advisor Recommendations, Azure RBAC Role Assignments, or Microsoft Purview Compliance Policies. The first statement uses Azure Cost Management Budget Alerts. Budget alerts are designed to monitor costs and send threshold notifications. A helpful shortcut is this. Use budgets and alerts to control spending after deployment. Use the pricing calculator to estimate costs before deployment. Let's work through question number 247. First, let's review the situation. Your Azure environment contains several unused resources, including Microsoft Entra ID user accounts, Microsoft Entra ID security groups, network interfaces, and standard public IP version 4 addresses. You need to remove resources that continue generating direct Azure usage charges. Solution: you delete the unused standard public IP version 4 addresses. Does this meet the goal? Now let's review the options. Option A is yes. Option B is no. The best choice is option A, yes. This is the best choice because standard public IP version 4 addresses are billed while allocated. Deleting unused addresses removes that ongoing charge. The listed Entra objects and unattached network interfaces do not create comparable direct usage charges by themselves. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. B. The solution does reduce cost because an allocated standard public IP version 4 address is a billable resource. The main takeaway is cost depends on the exact resource type and SKU. Verify whether an unused resource remains billable before leaving it provisioned. Here's an important one, question number 248. Let's focus on the following scenario. An organization is evaluating Azure government for workloads subject to United States government security and compliance requirements. Which two types of organizations can be eligible to use Azure government subject to Microsoft validation? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Choose the best two responses. Focus on what separates these choices. Now examine choice A. A United States federal, state, or local government entity. Now examine choice B. A validated partner providing services to a United States government agency. Now examine choice C. A European Union government agency with no United States government relationship. Now examine choice D. A commercial enterprise operating only in Canada. Now examine choice E. Any non-profit organization headquartered in the United States. The answers that work here are option A. A United States federal, state, or local government entity, and option B. A validated partner providing services to a United States government agency. Azure Government is a dedicated sovereign cloud for eligible United States government customers and their validated partners. Eligibility is reviewed before access is granted. Now let's rule out the other options. C. A European agency without a qualifying US government relationship is not an Azure Government customer. D. Operating only in Canada does not establish Azure Government eligibility. E. US headquarters alone does not make every non-profit eligible. Here's a useful exam tip. Sovereign clouds are isolated environments designed for specific governmental, residency, and compliance requirements. See how you handle question number 249. This question takes us into infrastructure as code. Before choosing, identify the key constraint. An enterprise needs to rapidly provision identical development, testing, and production environments containing dozens of Azure resources for different business units. The deployment process must be automated, repeatable, and less prone to human error. Solution: you recommend using Azure management groups to automate the creation of these resources. Does this meet the goal? Compare each option with the requirement. Next, option A, yes. Next, option B, no. The right response is option B, no. Let's look at the reasoning. Management groups are used to manage access, policy, and compliance across multiple subscriptions hierarchically. They do not natively automate the creation or deployment of Azure resources. To automatically and repeatably deploy resources, you must use infrastructure as code tools like Azure Resource Manager, ARM, templates, or Bicep. The other choices do not work because A. Approving management groups for deployment automation is incorrect because their purpose is governance, not resource provisioning. Exam tip. Use management groups for governance, Azure Policy, RBAC, use ARM templates for deployment automation. Let's take a look at question number 250. Take a moment to review this scenario. Employees use several cloud applications. The company wants them to authenticate once and then access the applications without repeatedly entering their credentials. Solution: you require multi-factor authentication for every application signing. Does this meet the goal? Take a look at each choice. Choice A, yes. Choice B, no. The answer here is option B, no. This works because multi-factor authentication strengthens verification by requiring additional evidence, but it does not by itself provide one sign-in across multiple applications. Single sign-on is the capability that lets users authenticate once and access multiple connected applications. The remaining options can be eliminated because A. MFA improves sign-in security but does not satisfy the requirement to avoid repeated application sign-ins. Keep this point in mind for the exam. SSO reduces repeated sign-ins. MFA increases assurance that the person signing in is the legitimate user. Now let's examine question number 251. We are moving on to virtual network peering. Here's the situation to consider. An application uses resources into Azure virtual networks. The resources must communicate privately over the Microsoft backbone without using the public internet. Solution: you configure an Azure VPN local network gateway to represent the second virtual network. Does this meet the goal? Take a look at each choice. Option A is yes. Option B is no. The best choice is option B, no. Here's why. A local network gateway normally represents an external network or VPN device for VPN connectivity. Azure Virtual Network Peering is the direct service for privately connecting Azure virtual networks over the Microsoft backbone. A local network gateway does not provide the requested direct peering relationship between the two Azure virtual networks. Use VNet peering for private Azure to Azure network connectivity. Use VPN gateway for encrypted connectivity to external networks or remote clients. Now for question number 252. A company is planning an Azure deployment and wants to estimate monthly costs based on proposed virtual machine sizes, regions, storage, and expected usage before creating any resources. Solution: you create Azure Cost Management Budget Alerts. Does this meet the goal? Option A, yes. Option B, no. Go with option B, no. The main reason is budget alerts monitor actual or forecasted spending for deployed resources. To model expected costs before deployment, the company should use the Azure pricing calculator and enter the planned services, configurations, regions, and usage. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. A. Budget alerts do not build a pre-deployment estimate for a proposed architecture. A helpful shortcut is this. Pricing calculator is for planning before deployment. Cost management is for analyzing and controlling spending after deployment. Let's focus on question number 253. This question takes us into application hosting. This situation sets up the main requirement. A company wants to host a custom web application in Azure. Microsoft should manage the underlying operating system and web hosting platform so the development team can focus on application code. Which Azure hosting option best meets the requirement? Watch the differences between these options. Now examine choice A, Azure App Service. Now examine choice B, Azure Virtual Machines. Now examine choice C, Azure Virtual Desktop. Now examine choice D, an Azure Storage Account. In this case, choose option A, Azure App Service. This is the best choice because Azure App Service is a managed platform as a service for hosting web applications. Microsoft manages the underlying infrastructure and operating system while the customer deploys and manages the application. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. B. Azure virtual machines require the customer to manage the guest operating system. C. Azure Virtual Desktop provides virtualized desktops and applications, not managed web hosting. D. A storage account stores data and static content, but is not the general pious web hosting platform described. The main takeaway is choose app service for managed web hosting and virtual machines when full guest operating system control is required. Let's continue with question number 254. Let's start with the scenario. A company is moving its on-premises infrastructure to an Azure pay-as-you-go subscription. The finance department wants to understand how this migration will affect their accounting and expenditure models. Solution: you explain that moving to a pay-as-you-go cloud model shifts spending to a capital expenditure (CapEx) model. Does this meet the goal? Let's compare the available options. Choice A, yes. Choice B, no. The right response is option B, no. Capital expenditure, CapEx, refers to the upfront cost of purchasing physical infrastructure, like on-premises servers. When moving to a cloud pay-as-you-go model, the organization stops paying for hardware upfront and instead pays for what they consume monthly. This represents an operational expenditure, OPEX, model, not a CapEx model. Now let's rule out the other options. A. Approving CapEx is incorrect because the cloud fundamentally shifts IT spending away from CapEx toward OPEX. Here's a useful exam tip. CapEx is an upfront investment in physical assets. OPEX is an ongoing expense for services consumed. Let's work through question number 255. The focus now shifts to Azure portal. Here's the situation to consider. You need to restart an Azure virtual machine and modify its network settings while traveling. You only have access to a mobile phone with a modern web browser. Which two management tools can you use from the mobile phone's browser to accomplish this? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. You need to identify two correct options. Here are the possible answers. Option A is the Azure portal. Option B is Azure Cloud Shell. Option C is Azure PowerShell installed locally. Option D is Azure Storage Explorer. Option E is Azure Virtual Machine Remote Desktop, RDP, client. You should choose option A, the Azure portal, and option B, Azure Cloud Shell. Let's look at the reasoning. The Azure portal is a web-based management console fully accessible from modern mobile web browsers. Embedded within the portal is Azure Cloud Shell, which provides a browser-based command line experience, Bash or PowerShell, without requiring any local software installation on the phone. The other choices do not work because C. You cannot natively install the full Azure PowerShell desktop module on an iPhone. The Azure Storage Explorer is a desktop application for Windows, macOS, and Linux. It does not run on iOS. E. While RDP allows you to access the inside of the VM OS, it does not allow you to change Azure-level network settings, like NSGS or VNets, or issue a hard reset from the Azure control plane. Exam tip. Azure Cloud Shell requires only a web browser, making it the ideal tool for running command line scripts from a mobile device or a borrowed computer. Question number 256. Needs a little extra thought. Look for the most important clue in this scenario. Your company needs to deploy a legacy application that requires custom third-party software to be installed directly onto the host operating system. The cloud architecture team dictates that you must use the appropriate cloud service model. Solution: you deploy the application using an infrastructure as a service (IaaS) offering. Does this meet the goal? Use the details in the question to eliminate options. Consider option A, yes. Consider option B, no. The answer here is option A, yes. This works because Infrastructure as a Service, IaaS, provides virtualized computing resources over the Internet. With Azure Virtual Machines, an IaaS offering, Microsoft manages the physical hardware, but you have full administrative control over the guest operating system. This is required if you must install custom, legacy, or third-party software directly onto the OS. The remaining options can be eliminated because B. Denying this solution is incorrect because IaaS is the only model that grants root administrative access to the underlying OS. Keep this point in mind for the exam. If a scenario requires you to install custom software on the C drive or modify the registry, you must choose IaaS, virtual machines. Question number 257. A company is moving its on-premises infrastructure to an Azure pay-as-you-go subscription. The finance department wants to understand how this migration will affect their accounting and expenditure models. Solution: you explain that moving to a pay-as-you-go cloud model uses a fixed-cost licensing expenditure model. Does this meet the goal? The choices are: Choice A, yes. Choice B, no. Go with option B, no. Here's why. Pay-as-you-go pricing is consumption-based. Charges vary with the quantity and duration of the services used rather than being a fixed licensing expense. A fixed-cost model does not describe pay-as-you-go consumption billing. Consumption pricing is variable. Stopping charges depends on the service. For example, a virtual machine must be deallocated to stop compute billing. Now for question number 258. This one focuses on consumption pricing. Here's what is happening. A company is moving its on-premises infrastructure to an Azure pay-as-you-go subscription. The finance department wants to understand how this migration will affect their accounting and expenditure models. Solution: you explain that moving to a pay-as-you-go cloud model shifts spending to an operational expenditure (OPEX) model. Does this meet the goal? Here are the options. Option A, yes. Option B, no. The best choice is option A, yes. The main reason is migrating to an Azure pay-as-you-go subscription shifts IT spending from an upfront capital expenditure, CapEx, for hardware to an ongoing operational expenditure, OPEX, for services consumed. You are billed monthly based on exactly what you use. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. B. Denying this solution is incorrect because pay-as-you-go is the definition of an OPEX model. A helpful shortcut is this. Cloud providers purchase the hardware, their CapEx, so customers can rent capacity on demand, the customer's OPEX. Take a careful look at question number 259. Pay close attention to what the scenario really requires. A company needs to run a short piece of code whenever a file is uploaded to Azure storage. The solution should be event-driven and should not require the company to manage servers. Solution: you deploy the code on a permanently running Azure virtual machine. Does this meet the goal? See which choices you can rule out. Consider option A, yes. Consider option B, no. The right response is option B, no. This is the best choice because a permanently running virtual machine requires operating system management and reserves compute capacity. Azure Functions is an event-driven serverless option that can run code in response to a file upload without requiring server management. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. A virtual machine can run code, but it does not meet the serverless and minimal management requirements. The main takeaway is use functions for short event-driven code. Use virtual machines when the workload requires operating system control. Now let's examine question number 260. Take a moment to review this scenario. An application runs on Azure virtual machines. It must remain available if one physical data center within the Azure region becomes unavailable. Solution: you deploy two virtual machines into the same availability zone. Does this meet the goal? Now let's review the options. Choice A, yes. Choice B, no. In this case, choose option B, no. An availability zone represents one or more data centers with independent power, cooling, and networking. If both virtual machines are in the same zone, a failure of that zone can affect both. The instances should be distributed across multiple zones. Now let's rule out the other options. A. Two virtual machines in one zone do not protect the application from failure of that zone. Here's a useful exam tip. Use multiple availability zones to protect against a data center level failure within one Azure region. Let's take a look at question number 261. First, let's review the situation. An application runs on Azure virtual machines. It must remain available if one physical data center within the Azure region becomes unavailable. Solution: you distribute the virtual machines across two availability zones in the same region. Does this meet the goal? Let's compare the available options. Option A is yes. Option B is no. The answer here is option A, yes. Let's look at the reasoning. Availability zones are physically separated within a region and have independent power, cooling, and networking. Distributing instances across zones allows one instance to remain available if another zone experiences a data center level failure. The other choices do not work because B. Denying the solution is incorrect because cross-zone deployment directly addresses the stated data center failure requirement. Exam tip. Availability zones provide data center level isolation within a region. Multiple regions provide protection from a regional failure. Let's continue with question number 262. Here's the situation to consider. An application runs on Azure virtual machines. It must remain available if one physical data center within the Azure region becomes unavailable. Solution: you deploy one virtual machine in a single availability zone and use locally redundant storage for its disks. Does this meet the goal? Take a look at each choice. Choice A, yes. Choice B, no. Go with option B, no. This works because a single virtual machine in one zone remains a single point of failure. Locally redundant storage keeps copies within one data center and does not create a second compute instance in another zone. The remaining options can be eliminated because the design does not provide cross-zone compute redundancy and therefore cannot survive loss of the hosting data center. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Storage redundancy protects data copies. Application availability also requires redundant compute instances in separate failure domains. Let's work through question number 263. Next, let's move into infrastructure as code. First, let's review the situation. A development team frequently provisions and deletes dozens of identical Windows and Linux virtual machines every week for testing purposes. You need to recommend a solution to automate and standardize the provisioning of these virtual machines to reduce administrative effort. Solution: you recommend using Azure Service Health to automate the deployments. Does this meet the goal? Now let's review the options. Option A is yes. Option B is no. The right response is option B, no. Here's why. Azure Service Health is an alerting tool that notifies you of Microsoft-initiated outages and planned maintenance affecting your resources. It cannot be used to automate the deployment, configuration, or deletion of virtual machines. A. Approving this solution is incorrect because Service Health is a monitoring tool, not an automation or deployment tool. For repeatable, automated infrastructure deployments, use infrastructure as code solutions like Azure Resource Manager, ARM, templates, Bicep, or Terraform. Question number 264 brings in a useful concept. The key situation is this. An organization has deployed an internal application on Azure virtual machines within a virtual network. Several employees work from home and travel frequently. These employees need secure access to the internal application from their individual laptops. Which Azure networking solution should you implement to support these remote workers? Focus on what separates these choices. Option A, point-to-site, P2S, VPN. Option B, site-to-site, S2S, VPN. Option C, Azure Virtual Network Peering. Option D, Azure Express Route. The best choice is option A, point-to-site, P2S, VPN. The main reason is a point-to-site, P2S, VPN connection allows individual client computers, like the laptops of remote workers, to connect securely to an Azure virtual network over the internet. This is ideal for telecommuters because it does not require dedicated VPN hardware on the client's end. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. B. A site-to-site, S2S, VPN connects an entire on-premises network, like a corporate headquarters, to Azure using a dedicated VPN device. C. VNet peering connects to Azure virtual networks together. It does not connect remote client devices. D. Express route is a dedicated, private connection from an enterprise data center to Azure, not for individual remote workers at home. A helpful shortcut is this. P2S is for individual remote workers. S2S is for connecting an entire branch office or data center. Let's take a look at question number 265. Next, let's move into Defender for Cloud. Let's start with the scenario. A security team needs a service that continuously assesses Azure resources and provides recommendations for improving the organization's cloud security posture. Solution: you use Microsoft Purview Information Protection. Does this meet the goal? Here are the possible answers. Choice A, yes. Choice B, no. The answer here is option B, no. This is the best choice because Microsoft Purview focuses on data governance, classification, and protection. Microsoft Defender for Cloud is the service that assesses cloud resources, summarizes security posture, and provides security recommendations. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. A. Purview does not serve as the primary cloud security posture management tool for Azure resources. The main takeaway is use Defender for Cloud for security posture and workload protection, use Microsoft Purview for data governance and compliance. Now let's examine question number 266. Take a moment to review this scenario. An organization wants to enhance its security posture. When employees attempt to sign into cloud applications from unfamiliar locations or unrecognized devices, they must be automatically prompted to complete a multi-factor authentication (MFA) challenge. Solution: you configure Microsoft Entra conditional access policies to enforce this requirement. Does this meet the goal? Here are the possible answers. Choice A, yes. Choice B, no. In this case, choose option A, yes. Microsoft Entra Conditional Access acts as the decision engine for identity security. By evaluating signals such as the user's IP address, location, and device state, conditional access policies can automatically block access or force a step-up challenge, like requiring MFA, before granting access to cloud applications. Now let's rule out the other options. B. Denying this solution is incorrect because conditional access is the exact mechanism used to enforce MFA dynamically based on risk signals. Here's a useful exam tip. Conditional access relies on if-then logic. If a user logs in from an untested location, then require MFA. Question number 267 brings in a useful concept. Let's focus on the following scenario. An organization wants to enhance its security posture. When employees attempt to sign into cloud applications from unfamiliar locations or unrecognized devices, they must be automatically prompted to complete a multi-factor authentication (MFA) challenge. Solution: you implement Microsoft Entra domain services to enforce this requirement. Does this meet the goal? Focus on what separates these choices. Option A, yes. Option B, no. Go with option B, no. Let's look at the reasoning. Microsoft Entra Domain Services provides managed legacy domain services like LDAP, Kerberos, and Group Policy for virtual machines. It does not evaluate sign-in risk or enforce MFA for cloud applications. To dynamically enforce MFA based on user location or device, you must use Microsoft Entra Conditional Access. The other choices do not work because A. Approving domain services for this scenario is incorrect as it handles legacy authentication, not modern conditional access policies. Exam tip. Use Microsoft Entra ID for modern web authentication. SAML, OAuth. Use Entra domain services only when lifting and shifting legacy apps that require Active Directory domain controllers. Let's continue with question number 268. Here's the situation to consider. A large enterprise with multiple independent departments is migrating to Azure. Each department needs its own isolated billing boundary and its own administrators to manage its specific resources. The organization wants to minimize identity management overhead. Solution: you recommend creating a separate Microsoft Entra ID tenant directory for every department. Does this meet the goal? Let's compare the available options. Option A is yes. Option B is no. In this case, choose option B, no. This works because creating a separate Microsoft Entra ID tenant directory for every department maximizes, rather than minimizes, identity management overhead. It forces users to have multiple logins and prevents seamless sharing of resources. Instead, you should use a single Entra ID tenant and segment the departments using separate Azure subscriptions or resource groups, controlling access via Azure RBAC. The remaining options can be eliminated because A. Approving multiple directories is incorrect because it creates massive administrative silos and violates the goal of minimizing overhead. Keep this point in mind for the exam. An organization should generally maintain a single Microsoft Entra ID tenant to act as the unified identity provider for all its Azure subscriptions. Now let's examine question number 269. Let's start with the scenario. A development team frequently provisions and deletes dozens of identical Windows and Linux virtual machines every week for testing purposes. You need to recommend a solution to automate and standardize the provisioning of these virtual machines to reduce administrative effort. Solution: you recommend defining and deploying the infrastructure using Azure Resource Manager (ARM) templates. Does this meet the goal? Take a look at each choice. Option A is yes. Option B is no. The right response is option A, yes. Here's why. Azure Resource Manager (ARM) templates provide a declarative infrastructure as code solution. By defining the virtual machines and their configurations in a JSON template, developers can rapidly, consistently, and automatically provision and later delete the entire environment with minimal administrative effort. B. Denying this solution is incorrect because ARM templates are the standard, best practice method for automating resource deployments in Azure. ARM templates ensure environments are deployed consistently every time, eliminating the human error associated with manual portal deployments. Let's work through question number 270. Take a moment to review this scenario. Your company needs to deploy a legacy application that requires custom third-party software to be installed directly onto the host operating system. The cloud architecture team dictates that you must use the appropriate cloud service model. Solution: you deploy the application using a software as a service (SaaS) offering. Does this meet the goal? Now let's review the options. Choice A, yes. Choice B, no. The best choice is option B, no. The main reason is software as a service, SaaS, delivers a fully managed, finished application, like Microsoft 365 or Salesforce, to end users. You cannot install custom third-party software onto the underlying operating system of a SaaS application. To gain access to the host OS for custom installations, you must use infrastructure as a service, IaaS, such as Azure Virtual Machines. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. A. Approving SaaS is incorrect because it abstracts away all access to the underlying infrastructure and OS. A helpful shortcut is this. In a SaaS model, the cloud provider manages everything from the physical data center up to the application code itself. Next up is question number 271. Here's the scenario. Your company needs to deploy a legacy application that requires custom third-party software to be installed directly onto the host operating system. The cloud architecture team dictates that you must use the appropriate cloud service model. Solution: you deploy the application using a platform as a service, PaaS, offering. Does this meet the goal? Here are the options. Option A, yes. Option B, no. The answer here is option B, no. This is the best choice because platform as a service, PaaS, abstracts the underlying operating system from the customer. The cloud provider handles OS patching and server configuration, meaning you cannot remote into the server to install custom third-party dependencies on the C drive. This requirement strictly necessitates infrastructure as a service, IaaS. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. A. Approving PIS is incorrect because PIS explicitly blocks administrative access to the host OS. The main takeaway is if an application architecture requires you to manage the operating system, you must deploy virtual machines, IaaS. Let's take a look at question number 272. First, let's review the situation. A company needs to run a short piece of code whenever a file is uploaded to Azure storage. The solution should be event-driven and should not require the company to manage servers. Solution: you implement the code as an Azure function triggered by the file upload. Does this meet the goal? Now let's review the options. Option A is yes. Option B is no. The answer here is option A, yes. Azure Functions is an event-driven serverless compute service. A storage trigger can run code when a file is uploaded while Azure manages the underlying infrastructure and scaling. Now let's rule out the other options. B. Denying the solution is incorrect because the event-driven, serverless requirements match the purpose of Azure Functions. Here's a useful exam tip. Azure Functions executes code in response to triggers such as HTTP requests, timers, queues, and storage events. Here comes question number 273. The focus now shifts to infrastructure as code. Consider this situation. An enterprise needs to rapidly provision identical development, testing, and production environments containing dozens of Azure resources for different business units. The deployment process must be automated, repeatable, and less prone to human error. Solution: you recommend using Azure Service Health to automate the creation of these resources. Does this meet the goal? The choices are: Choice A, yes. Choice B, no. Go with option B, no. Let's look at the reasoning. Azure Service Health is a monitoring and alerting tool that notifies you of Microsoft-initiated incidents and planned maintenance affecting your resources. It has no capabilities for automating the creation or deployment of Azure infrastructure. The correct solution is an infrastructure as code tool like ARM templates. The other choices do not work because A. Approving Service Health is incorrect because it is an informational dashboard, not an automation engine. Exam tip: do not confuse Azure Service Health, Microsoft outages, with Azure Resource Health, the health of your specific VM, or Azure Monitor, general performance metrics. Question number 274. An enterprise needs to rapidly provision identical development, testing, and production environments containing dozens of Azure resources for different business units. The deployment process must be automated, repeatable, and less prone to human error. Solution: you recommend using Azure Resource Manager, ARM, templates to automate the creation of these resources. Does this meet the goal? Option A, yes. Option B, no. In this case, choose option A, yes. This works because Azure Resource Manager, ARM, templates are JSON files that define the infrastructure and configuration for your project. Using ARM templates allows you to implement infrastructure as code, ensuring that identical environments can be deployed rapidly, repeatedly, and reliably without manual portal intervention. The remaining options can be eliminated because B. Denying this solution is incorrect because ARM templates are the native Azure method for deployment automation. Keep this point in mind for the exam. ARM templates are declarative. You state what you want the final environment to look like, and Azure figures out how to deploy it. You have completed part 7 of the AZ-900 practice question series. Continue your preparation by opening the complete playlist and watching the remaining parts in sequence. Please like this video, subscribe to Tech with Kaushik, and enable notifications for more cloud certification exam preparation content. Share your score, questions, or feedback in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next part.